So today I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Ger Graus, who is the Global Director of Education for KidZania. Now, for those who don't know KidZania, it's an international organisation that provides dedicated role-play experience centres for children aged 4 to 14. And it's located in major cities around the world. KidZania uses an interactive city to introduce children to more than 100 different potential careers. Now, Ger first moved to the UK in 1983, beginning his career as a language teacher. He later became an educational advisor for Manchester City Council and pioneered 2 major education improvement programmes in the city. And he was the founding chief executive of the Children's University. And under his supervision, the Children's University became a multiple award-winning international charity providing 5 to 14-year-olds with exciting and innovative learning opportunities outside of school hours. Now, the Children's University global reach now extends as far as Australia, China, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Middle East. And Ger started at KidZania London in 2014, where he has been responsible for developing the UK-wide education strategy. This includes partnerships with schools, higher education, commercial and third sector learning partners. And in 2014, the Queen's Birthday Honours List, Ger was made an OBE for services to children. So in today's interview, we'd like to ask you all about your insights into the transition process and what could be done to improve it.
Hello, Sue.
Well, thank you for joining me. That took a real mouthful to introduce all your major achievements. So I'm thrilled that you're here today, giving up a bit of time to talk to me. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So let's get cracking. Can you tell me, please, a little bit about your childhood, where you were born and how it influenced you and what brought you to the UK?
So I was born in the south of Holland in a small town near Maastricht, and in what was then a coal mining community. And it wasn't a coal mining community for long, because I think it was probably certainly a Western European trend that coal mines either ran out of coal or were seen as too dirty and were closed down. So I lived in an odd kind of community, and I think like many coal mining communities, they were reasonably affluent, full of hardworking people who took lots of risks, and whose aspiration it was that their children should follow them into that job, essentially, because people were fine with it. It was very local, the same thing, brass bands and festivals and all those things. And then halfway through my schooling, the coal mines closed, and many proud people and many proud families ended up doing jobs that a central government invented for them and were far less well off, and many of them were unemployed also, but were also far less proud and far less of a community. And so in that malaise of things, I became essentially the first one in my family to go to university and to leave the area. Then I trained as a teacher, as a German teacher, and by the time I'd finished, teachers in Holland were in those days well paid, and there weren't many jobs around. So rather than sit around and either feel sorry for myself or do little, I went to the library in Maastricht, and on a Saturday stumbled across a newspaper called the Times Education Supplement. There's a plug for you. And
Yes.
And there was a job advertised, urgently required 1 year only teacher of German, Tevram High School, Norwich. Contact the head teacher directly, which is what I did. And I went to Norwich and was offered a post for 1 year. And then I thought I'll go back to Holland after that, because I've got some experience under my belt, and we'll see what happens. So 1 year then became 37 or whatever it is now. Because what happens, of course, is you settle and you quite like it, and then you do quite well job-wise, and then you move to your next job, and all of a sudden, it's a bit like having children, really. You blink and you realize that they're grown up. Yeah. So here I am. And I kind of moved from a school. It was a brilliant school. It was a new school. We started with 69 kids, I think. We grew to about 500. everybody in the school knew everybody else, which had all sorts of advantages, as I later discovered, because I moved from there to a school in Hull, which was 5 times as big, basically. And what I learned in the school in Hull was that, one, it was in a very disadvantaged area, so you learn lots of lessons about kids there. And one of the things I learned was that the last thing those children really needed was a big school in which many of them became anonymous, because actually, who do you know? You know the kids who are bright, you know the kids who need additional support, and you know the kids who are naughty. And actually, to be truthful, Sue, I didn't know all the teachers, let alone the kids, because it was so big, right? And so the lesson for me became that big schools are really a decision that is reached for economic reasons rather than educational reasons. And actually, after 37 years, I've concluded that all decisions in England that affect education are made for economic reasons and never for educational reasons. So when people reorganize special needs schools and close them down, for example, we need to seriously think that we are truthful on this. So I moved from there, became languages advisor in Manchester, joined the dark side, became an inspector, became Anakin Skywalker again, and then had the opportunity when 1999 to be in charge of what were called education action zones. And it was kind of my first foray into something that was outside the norm, because education action zones essentially were groups of schools in very disadvantaged areas who, in partnership with the private sector, tried to improve things and were independent of local authorities. You might argue that they were forerunners of academies and large mats in many ways. Our industry, in my case, my industry partner, as it were, was Manchester Airport. I had an office at Manchester Airport, and Manchester Airport's interest was it wanted to work with schools and children to effectively help educate a better workforce. So that's what it was. And then from there, I was approached to become the CEO of the Children's University, which then took me into the whole thing about out of school hours learning. And from there, I made some friends in London who then acquired the franchise for KidZania London. And from helping them out over breakfast or whatever else, it became a job. And then some years later, I got a phone call from Mexico. KidZania's founder wanted to talk to me whether I wanted to do this job globally. Wow. And there's 37 years gone. So that's it.
Oh, what a journey. I mean, one of the things I find fascinating about you is you're very, very enthusiastic, even now after all these years. But one of the key messages that I want you to talk to me about is that children can only aspire to what they know. And I remember you telling me this story, because I was on the think tank for KidZania for a little while, around, people like us don't do jobs like that. There was a story, I think. Yeah. But tell us more about what you mean and why it's so central to what you believe in about the aspirations for kids.
So that story goes back to my Manchester Airport days. And I've just talked about why Manchester Airport was involved. And so I went and talked to lots of youngsters. There were 30 schools in Wythenshawe at the time, about 19 primaries, and then a few special and a few secondary schools. And I got talking to youngsters from the primary schools, including Button Lane, where Marcus Rashford, bless him, went to school.
Yeah.
And I asked them the question, what jobs could you do at the airport? And the answer you got from 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds was the things they could see. Baggage handling, driving the buses, passport control, whatever it was, right? And so there is a very large percentage of jobs at the airport that you can't see. So instantly, because you don't know, you can't aspire to what you don't know.
Yes.
Yeah? So that was really the first thing. And so that kind of led me to conclude that businesses needed to put themselves more out there. They can't complain that they don't get applicants or appropriately qualified young people if nobody knows what they're up to.
Yeah.
But then I got talking to a group of youngsters and said, look, you can fly planes, you can see them. And I got this thing back from several youngsters who were 5, 6, 7, and said, people from here don't fly planes. Yeah. So that kind of led me to conclude that children don't like aspirations, we do that for them. And so how do you then tackle that? And I don't think you tackle that by teaching them in lessons in schools, but I think you tackle that by offering them a menu of experiences where they can make up their own mind. So you facilitate experience-based learning. And that's it, really.
I want to jump in about that because I've always been fascinated about the role that the parents also play in that aspiration, because it's fantastic that you offer up and you show children all these things, but there are always, if the parents are, because they're their main role models, aren't they, and they're passing on their values to them, parents play a very important role in that too, don't they? In how can we what do you think about helping parents with some of those aspirations?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I'll try and be as politically correct as I possibly can soon.
No, go on, go on, off out of the box.
But I think I'm not so convinced that parents necessarily see themselves as role models, or not all parents see themselves as role models, because I think some parents, maybe more than just some, see themselves as disempowered. Because everything is kind of dictated from elsewhere. So, for example, and to a degree, I'd include myself in this. If my 15-year-old daughter comes home with her science homework, I'm really sorry, darling, but I don't know where to begin. So I feel kind of disempowered from that. From that angle. Then I think the role modeling that the parents, because so children can only aspire to what they know exists. Parents can only aspire to what they know exists. Right? And if you are in a context whereby you are talking about that, almost generations of unemployment, 0-hour contracts, on and off employment, falling on that cusp of, can I get credit? Do I need to work 16 hours? Whatever it is, that balancing act. I'm not surprised that adults, including then parents, turn around and say, well, actually, this whole school thing never did it for me, because look where it got me. Right? Once you become part of this understandable but not excusable, understandable dialogue, conversation, kids pick that up, right? Also, as a parent, you are, if that becomes your, within your context, if that becomes your mindset, you might be less pushed to get out of bed in the morning and take them there. So that reflects on attitudes, right? So that's on one side. Now let me go to the other side, and I think COVID showed some quite ugly things, I think, at times. So I'm talking globally now, but I also know in this country that in the independent sector, for example, parents think that they pay for the schools to solve their problems. So in a sense, there are parents who send their children to independent schools to absolve themselves from their responsibility, right? And so I pay the school to do that, so therefore I don't have to do it, becomes the attitude of some, hopefully not of many. But when the call came during COVID, when the youngsters from the independent schools were being taught online at home, and parents were asking for significant reductions in fees, and I'm seeing parents treating their children as a barter kind of commodity, my chin hit the floor, because supposedly people who earn quite a bit of money, who are therefore well educated, hadn't quite understood that schools still have to pay salaries and still have to do this and that and that. And actually, that there is an additional cost to providing an online for it. But mostly, why would you put up that argument? Right? Why make the education of your child something that you can barter about? So again, I think I would analyze that as a level of disengagement. So there is a wide dialogue to be had about how can we get parents involved again. And schools also have their role to play in this, because when you have very large fences around buildings and intercom systems, and by and large, you don't actually not very welcoming, and you've got parents' evenings whereby you only see them for a quarter of an hour, and then you really want to get rid of them for the next 12 months, so I think attitudinally we need to come together on this. And I think it's easier perhaps than we think, because if we put the little person in the middle, who we all care about, then that should kind of slightly change our behavior and gravitate towards the center rather than to what's important to me.
Interesting, fascinating discussion, really. But so social mobility, what enables that for children? I'm looking at it from the primary to secondary transition period. Tell me about what you think and how transition is so important then to helping children achieve whatever they need to achieve, or aspire rather than attainment, really.
I think firstly we need to recognize that transition is something that we have artificially created. Right. It is not part of a normal curve of growing older or growing up, or whichever way we want to call it. The reason we have transition is because we've decided to, in certain age groups, put them in certain buildings with certain teachers and certain things to be taught. Right? And then we call that early years, and we call it primary, and we call it second, and we call it post-16 and whatever else. And every time we pass the parcel, right? And every time we do our best, and then we pass the parcel. And whoever we pass the parcel to never says thank you. But they'll always say, oh, they're not quite as good as I thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
And how many schools or colleges or whatever they are at the end of the ride, at 18, how many of those colleges and schools write to the primary schools and say, we just want to let you know how well your kids, how well our kids have done, right? Because so transition is something entirely artificial and man-made. So that's that bit. Then I think we need to realize, and some of the KidZania research ties into this, that children's attitudes form very early, right? And we know from our research, for example, that stereotypes are well established by the age of 4, right? Then we have that really odd thing that we don't then talk to children about what they might want to do with the rest of their lives until they're 14. So for 10 years, we allow this to cement. And then we wonder why we have gender issues in terms of choices and achievements and attainments and whatever else. So I think I'd put it that we don't know our children well enough. And what we transition is almost entirely based on attainment and attendance and effort, and not who the child is. And I think so, when we're talking about real transition, then that needs to be about the whole person, about what interests them. And that's very difficult from a small primary school into a large secondary school. And I see all those structural problems, but the transition needs to be focused on the child, on the individual child, and how that individual child functions inside a group, rather than on the needs of the institution where the child is going. And I think there are some very good examples that are applied at an older stage that we perhaps could apply at a younger stage. So let me use an example. When my eldest daughter went, this some years ago now, when she went to Liverpool University, it was an amazing experience. And the reason, and the start of her university life was an amazing experience. And the reason it was, there was this young woman, quite nervous like you are when you go to somewhere new and embark on this and leaving home and all those things. But because the university was so student focused, they put all the students who lived on that particular corridor in the halls of residence in touch with each other in a Facebook group well before they went. So she knew everybody on her corridor before they went. She knew everybody on her course before they went. They sent information about if you wanted a part-time job, how to go about it. So essentially, they provided that contact and the ability to contact and communicate with others long before, and they used online. It made her, she was quite a shy young woman. It made her quite confident in going. And it made her look forward to going. And it's quite amazing, isn't it, that people look forward to change? Because quite often I remember going from primary to secondary school and biting my fingernails and not sleeping and all that. Well, all of that with her went. Now there is, and I'm doing some work. I think you know Henry. I'm doing some work with Henry Platt, and they've got a platform called Go Bubble, for example,
Yes, I do.
which essentially is kind of Instagram for under 13-year-olds, right?
But regulated, because he's an ex-policeman, isn't he?
Yeah, regulated, goes to the school, safe as houses.
Yes.
But the principle remains the same. And you know what you can do? You could start that from year 4. You could have buddy systems. You could have existing year 7s telling year 5s what it's like. You could even include the mums and dads and the families in that dialogue. So you set up a parent group or whatever else. And all of a sudden you have that same principle. Because what works for an 18-year-old can work and should work for an 11-year-old. Why not? Yeah. And all of a sudden you're doing much more, because what happens is when those youngsters walk through your door on the 1st of September of whatever year, they know the people who are in their class, they've already done this, they've already done that, they've taken part in, they know some of the older youngsters. And it seems so obvious that is what we should look at.
So at the core of that is belonging and community and relationship. Yeah. So these are the key words I was just writing down as you were speaking of. Building relationships, making you feel that you belong. And there was a STARS report that did say that feeling of belonging. What other ideas? I mean, that's fantastic, isn't it? And so interesting to people listening to this. I hope they start to think out of the box, because what do schools need to do? Because I always feel that we don't bridge the gap. They kind of have, barriers and walls between the primary and the secondary, don't they? So where would you start this kind of buddy system?
I think there's a couple of other things too. And firstly, I think schools are under the cosh, right? They're under the cosh of a centralized regime that has behaved quite appallingly, I think, over the last couple of years, that actually takes teachers not seriously as professionals. The whole COVID thing showed us that, because why would we not have gone to teacher assessment? Why was that such a big deal? Treat people like adults and professionals, and they'll behave like it. So I think all of those things, that whole free school meals thing or not, I just think it's just incredibly badly done, and is a blot on our educational landscape and the behaviour of the government and subsequently its civil servants around it. So schools are under the cosh, right? And teachers feel immensely pressurized. And those pressures are institutional. Nobody says your target is to do the right thing by your children. Everybody says you got to get the grades. They've got to turn up for 97%, blah, blah, blah. And so I think you have to sympathize that it is not easy. And if I look back at my very happy days in my first couple of teaching years, when my head teacher in 1993 said to me, on my very first day, my very first lesson, with 10 minutes before that lesson, she came to see me and said 2 things. Don't forget to enjoy yourself, and don't forget to make mistakes, because otherwise you'll make me look silly. Okay, can you imagine that?
Can you imagine that?
But
wow.
But developmentally and as a matter of confidence, it's incredibly important.
Yes.
So where should schools begin? Schools should begin with the child and the dialogue between the institutions, and should begin small, and should look at steps that are achievable rather than some grand vision. If you're a school in Sheffield or wherever you are, work with your 4 or 5 partner primary schools, get in there. Come up with solutions that are child-focused, that are not just about transitioning, that are, and that, the point you were making earlier, that make us feel belong. There are things in the independent sector that genuinely, and I don't mean the attainment agenda, but that genuinely some state schools should look at. I mean, I asked myself, for example, the question, why is the alumni concept in private schools very often so strong, and why is the alumni agenda in a lot of state schools almost non-existent? Right? Is that about a sense of belonging? Is that about a sense of purpose? I can see Twitter going with some cynical answers now, but I don't subscribe to those, because the people I talk to are proud to have gone to that school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And quite often, of course, you do in the private sector transition all the way through. So you go from the junior school into the secondary school, etc. So I think this is about ethos, and I think this is about values, and this is about small steps and achievable, and we should utilize technology. So, my view, I used it earlier, I would literally look and go and talk to somebody like Henry at Go Bubble and say, can we develop this? Can we do that story that was told about Liverpool University? Can we do that locally?
Yeah.
Can we build in a parent component in this so that parents understand that it gets quite hard when they get to 13, but parents also understand what the requirements and what their responsibilities are as part of that moving from one to the other? Because actually, it is kind of quite weird, isn't it, as a parent? Because, there you are, year 6, you still drop them off, you pick them up, you talk to the teacher, you talk to the teaching assistant, whoever's in the playground, you talk to the other people in the socially distant queue. And then you go to secondary school and they basically say, well, you can drop them off at the gate. There's a big fence and we'd rather not see you. This is exaggerated and generalized. But if you put yourself in the shoes of the parent, that's not easy. That's a big shift. So make the parent part of that transition that is initially perhaps an online exercise and that is mixed with real events as well. Start small.
Because I think what you're talking about there really is the intention, and it takes time rather than necessarily loads of money.
Yeah.
And I keep hearing that sense of community. You build relationships, you forge kind of pride in belonging. And so that makes perfect sense to me that you could be doing that.
Absolutely. And of course, Sue, the whole COVID thing has shown us something that I think we haven't quite realized. So there is Barcelona Football Club has a motto that is Més que un club, more than a club.
Mm.
What COVID shown us is that almost all schools are more than a school. Yeah. And almost all teachers are more than a teacher, right? The food parcels, the extra work, the online, the ones who couldn't go online went an extra mile to still make it work.
Yeah.
So we know that it's possible. We know that it exists. So hang on to it, right? And make transition a part of this. Don't make it a tokenistic thing. Don't just wait until your GCSEs are out the way and do the last 6 weeks or whatever else. Yeah? Utilize it and actually involve the older students in the secondary school in it.
Yes.
Because one, they've had the experience. Secondly, they're quite good at being mentors.
Yeah.
Right? Actually, they're probably better at being mentors than most grown-ups are. Yeah. Give them responsibility. Trust the children.
Yeah.
Right? We should trust the children as much as they trust us. And so give them the responsibility. Make it a volunteering exercise as part of the Duke of Edinburgh Award. What do I know, right?
Yeah. That you give back and that you want to be able to help others as they come up through school. Yeah.
If you come to this school, you've had all of these things before you got here, and it's made your life easier. Now it's your turn.
Yeah.
Kids get that. Kids do that naturally.
Yeah.
So build on that.
So listen, coming now, I know that we can't talk forever. Coming to what you think. So if people are interested in this concept of how they start the process, not 6 weeks before they go to their school in year 6, because obviously what it's taught us as well with COVID, everything locked down in March and they had to abruptly leave their year 6 and start in their year 7. And that's why we've been doing this program and this vision around this whole idea to support the whole learning process throughout the years. And I'm very interested in that breadth that we could possibly contribute to or get involved in or raise awareness of as a campaign, is so that children are, supported, nurtured, helped, looked after by the whole community, their mum, their dad, their teacher, the caretaker, all sorts of people are in this to make sure a child's well-being and their learning is supported, nurtured and they can blossom and they can bloom. So if people listening to this are interested in that concept, what do you reckon we could all do then to come together to, is it talking to Henry at Go Bubble, or what is it, or talking to you? What do you think we can raise more awareness of the practicalities of doing this?
I think the issue will always run through the schools, and schools are much better. So I'd be perfectly happy to go and talk to people about it. So would you. So would Henry, right?
Yeah.
But I think the issue is to work it through the school, and to. My favorite book is The Little Prince, and one of my favorite quotes is all grown-ups were once children, but only very few of them remember it. And I think it is about that kind of empathy level and putting yourself into other people's shoes. So, for example, I was talking to somebody about this fairly recently when they're talking about parental engagement and how the parents are reluctant to become involved in that.
Yeah.
And me and my science homework, or my daughter's science homework. How about if you had an agreement in a school, in a primary school or a secondary school, that once a week or once a fortnight you set a family homework. Right? And the homework is not completed until everybody has participated in this. And in my science terms, that could be, simple example, watching a David Attenborough program with my daughter. Yeah. Right? Even I can do that bit. Yeah. So but what you are beginning to do is you are beginning to draw in the parents and making them a co-educator. They're not a co-teacher, but they are a co-educator.
I love that. And because I have a thing called ING activities, ING activities, which are things like cooking, baking, cycling, looking for mini beasts in the garden, ING. Whatever the ING is parents getting involved in doing the broader stuff, but spending, because I always say, as you know, children spell love, T-I-M-E. So all of that is building into that sense of, I love that. So homework is not this thing that's done to them they can't bear. I did a Ladybird Instagram live yesterday all around little learners and how we get them to do their homework. And I thought, play with them, read with them, listen to them, bake with them, help them count when they're laying out the table, all sorts of practical stuff. So for me, I think that is an absolutely fascinating idea. So you just build that kind of mindset and mentality into the whole of the school process. And
I think you need to look at what you want. So would we like a really powerful, and these things are all contextual and they're all relative, but a powerful alumni network, right? We probably all would. Well, that's one thing that we want to achieve. We want that transition to work really well. We want the kids to be happy kids. We want them to be learning kids. And you write your list and then you brainstorm. And some of the stuff that will come out, people will say, we can't do that.
Yeah.
But don't do. There is something English. I'll say this as a foreigner now. There's something English about complaining and then not doing anything about it.
Oh, right? Yes, that victim mentality.
Yeah. So just get off the fence and roll up your sleeves and just get on with it, because it's like, in the whole employability scheme, businesses sit on the fence going, this year they haven't got the skills that they need, or other. Well, come and help us then, right? Yeah. And it's the same with parents. Now in my wife's school, her motto is every child is everyone's responsibility.
Oh, I love that.
And I think that's completely spot on.
Yes.
So let's just lose that bit about I can't do this and all that stuff, and let's just roll up our sleeves and let's make stuff happen. Yeah. And I can't at the moment, and I've talked to lots of people about this, I can't think of a better way, of a better conversation. If I were head of school now and I wanted to do this transition stuff, I would look at that Liverpool University example and I would pick up the phone to somebody like Henry and say, can you help us make that happen? Because the beauty about that level of technology is it's actually not much work. As we know, if you think of Twitter, for example, for all the good and bad, it isn't much work, is it? Because people just do it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What you would need to have, and of course, Go Bubble has this. Which I love about it, is every posting is checked, right? Yeah. So the idiotic behavior that sits on Twitter simply can't happen on Go Bubble. Yes. But the other thing is, you would expect a school to say to participants in this, there is a code of conduct here.
Yeah, and you're educating them actually all the way through about how to behave on that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to jump in just there, because I'm realizing we've got to come to an end, but I was actually thinking of Jim Rohan's expression. He's passed away now, but he was a fantastic speaker, philosopher, and I love all his quotes. And his attitude was, how can we come together? And for me, that's an important mindset. It's not somebody else's responsibility. We're all in this together. So you've given us loads of food for thought. I hope people have found this really interesting and thought-provoking, which it was supposed to be. And thank you very much, Ger, for your time today.
Always, Sue. And if people want to get in touch, you can put whatever email address you think at the bottom of the thing, can't you? So
yes, absolutely. And as everybody knows, you're on Twitter, and we'll give the email address. And it's about, let's do something different. This is an opportunity. COVID has made us stand back, made us pause to ponder some of the good stuff, some of the bad stuff, but let's be together in it and be innovative so that we can have the next generation of kids even more empowered with great aspirations. So
I mean, I'll never forget, Sue, to close on, I'll never forget a quote by Tim Brighouse, who, when I was with him once at a heads conference, asked head teachers how well they thought they knew their children. And many of the answers were around predicted grades, etc. And then Tim asked them the question, do you know what flavour crisps they're like? And I'd like to think that as part of a transition, that in year 6 and in year 7, they both know what flavour crisps they're like, because I think then we're on track, basically.
Oh, I love it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Sue.